to the tavern, and a few ladies came back, followed me in afterward, 3 ladies, and they sat down at a table next to me. My meal came before theirs, and I was munching away, and they said, "Boy, that looks good." And I said, "Yes, this is sweet potato fries." And anyway, we got into this conversation, and I said, "Well, I've never been here before because I'm just passing through." "Well, where are you going?" "I'm going to West Cumberland for a book signing." "Really? What's the name of your book?" And I told them, and they said, "Well, that's it. We're buying 3 books." So they invited me to sit at their table, and we had a nice conversation, and I sold 3 books before I even got into it. Things like that do happen, I think, probably to all of us. I want to thank you all for inviting me here. It started with Nancy. Well, actually, Netta told Kenny, and Kenny told Nancy, and pretty soon Nancy found me on Facebook and said, "Are you planning to come up here for a book signing?" And I said, "Well, I haven't been, but I will." And so that's how it all started. So Nancy couldn't be here today, but I want to thank her and all of you for inviting me here. This is an awful lot of fun, and it's good to see old faces and new ones. And anyway, I would like to talk to you a little bit about how I wrote the book and why. And I think this book had been in my head for a long time. A few years ago, my daughter asked me to write down some stories that I had told her about the old days. You know how you do. You tell your kids what it was like in the old days. So I did. I wrote a chapter, an essay, and I gave one to her, a copy to her, and one to my son for a Christmas present. And they thought that was pretty good. And then a couple of years passed before I decided that I would expand that into a book. And the motivation came to me in the fall of 2008, after I had gone to New Mexico to a family reunion and seen cousins I had not seen in many years. It was an exciting and life-changing event. After I got home, I wrote about the experience. Being a writer, I have to write about everything. Wow, I thought to myself, this would make a great first chapter. And so I began to write. And once I started, I just couldn't stop. Memories came flooding back to me, and for the most part, I sat at the computer and wrote for many hours, for many days. I finished the book in about 6 months. During this time, I discovered there was a great deal of material, in addition to my own memories, that I could include. I might have included, for example, the establishment of the United Nations, whose headquarters are located overlooking the East River in New York City, and whose impact would reach around the globe. Or I could have included the creation of the national highway system, unmatched anywhere in the world, and the building of a consumer nation that would change the world's economy and our own popular culture forever. Yes, this all happened in our mid-century, the 1950s, while you and I were playing basketball and baseball and going to high school dances, struggling over homework, and making plans for our own futures. Little did we know then how life would change for all of us through the social and economic dynamics that burst forth during the decades after the end of World War II. As I said in my book, the decade after the war deserves its own book. I did not attempt to write a social history of the 1950s. Only those particular events that I was aware of and the people in my life that most influenced me and shaped my future. I attempted to present a broad view of my early life and all its complexities, and so consciously made choices in the specific topics I should write about. I tried to strike a balance between historical fact and personal recollection, and I believe I succeeded. Research methods. What were the resources that aided my writing? The internet was the major source of research. As a result, I needed only one library book. Another source of information was my brother Ronnie's research on World War II and the role our dad played in the war. Ron supplied me with many authentic details of Dad's Army training and deployment to Europe, and most importantly, of his capture at the Battle of the Bulge and his life as a prisoner. I must tell you that writing that story kept me in a state of tears for many days. Dad would not talk to me of those events, and learning about them at this stage of my life was both eye-opening and empowering, because I came to understand him better. However, he was a complex man, and I wrote about my relationship with him and why it was conflicted and difficult nearly all my life. My dad's life became not only a historical resource, but a source of inspiration as well. An interesting fact is that the carefree 50s of our teenage years were overlaid with many political and social changes and the fears that went with them, such as the polio epidemic, the Cold War, the atomic age, and others. I have tried to show how these dynamics were underlying the carefree life of a teenager and the new rock and roll, television, high school sports. Man, I'm sure you know what I mean. An important resource that aided my research into the events was the PBS television series, The American Experience. Just at the time I was researching the events of the 1950s, two important programs were broadcast on PBS. The Trials of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the story of the development of the atomic bomb, and the Polio Crusade, how fear and courage brought an end to this dreaded disease. I was able to watch the series as well as go online and read the manuscripts used in the television programs. I could pick up details that I inevitably missed while watching the shows, and their own research notes that gave authenticity to the stories. Another vital resource came from the book my mother wrote and self-published in 1984, called Forever Young. It was the result of her researching the family genealogy. In her research, she found published articles and stories about some of our ancestors going back to the 1600s. I find these characters fascinating. They passed on their values, hard work, perseverance, and a Christian legacy that belongs to us today. I own that legacy. It is so important to me and to my family to know where we came from and the people who influence us even now. And I cherish the work my mother did to preserve those stories. I include an entire chapter on her work. Not only was her book a great resource, but a source of inspiration as well. Some have asked me why write the book now. I say it is the best possible time for me to have written this book. A book takes an enormous commitment of time, big blocks of time. And prior to this, I was a working woman, and my time was committed to other things and to other people. It is also a good time because I have the gift of a long memory and a perspective on those experiences that I did not have when I was younger. Let me give you an example. When I look back on my early childhood in Portland, I now have a perspective on World War II that I could not have had until now. I lived one block from Portland Harbor, and on the other side of that harbor were the South Portland shipyards. At the time, of course, I did not understand the implication of this. I was but 3 and 4 years old. But now, having researched the area and the era, and having lived a long life, I can more fully appreciate what it took for my mother to raise my brother and me and to keep us safe. There was a war going on in the Atlantic, and cargo ships were being built within earshot of our home. Not only that, but members of my family worked in those shipyards and contributed their skills and dedication to winning the war. I did not fully understand and appreciate that until I wrote this book. Garrison Keillor, of A Prairie Home Companion fame, states that you write in order to learn. And I have certainly learned a great deal from this book. Through all the years, my mother and the other women in my family kept strong family ties, even though they were separated by many miles, thousands of miles in some cases. I strongly believe that those ties, forged long ago, have strengthened our family and even today have brought us full circle, and I give tribute to these women. I would like to read a portion of a chapter, and it is about my grandmother Young. Lest you think this is a totally serious book, let me tell you about this eccentric woman. The chapter is called The Diary. She left a diary from 1956, and I am the proud owner of that diary. Grandmother Young was a very pious and religious woman. She talked about her beliefs a great deal and peppered her speech with phrases like, "Lord have mercy," and "Hush up, you'll get your reward in heaven." Expressing any complaint was a sin in her mind, and one should ever be grateful for one's blessings and meet life's challenges with perseverance and faith. Sunday was truly a day for worship, not work, and certainly not for idle pleasure. Uncompromising in her beliefs, she tolerated no card playing on Sunday. In fact, I doubt that she approved of card playing at all. Alcohol was strictly forbidden in her household. She was a strange mixture of Yankee perseverance and frugality, Southern style and speech, and true gospel evangelism. Her childhood was spent in Washington, D.C., apparently with enough Southern culture in her to influence her speech and her thinking. Many of the songs she sung had a definite Southern influence, such as Negro spirituals and songs by Stephen Foster, and her speech had a particular flavor and rhythm. She loved to sing and would play the piano and sing "Little Liza Loves You" whenever presented with an opportunity. This became a family favorite because we never heard it anywhere else, no doubt from her Southern exposure. My first song was "Just One Girl," which I learned from her at the age of 2, sitting on her lap and listening to her sing. I loved my grandmother very much, in spite of, or perhaps because of, her idiosyncrasies. Her heavy-handed Christianity and dogged determination influenced everyone she came in contact with, especially her family. This attitude could either bring you into the fold or turn you away altogether. She bore 8 children, and she would sometimes run through the litany of names as she tried to remember which grandchild she was talking to. George, Lawrence, Ned, Ruth, Rachel, Doris. "Oh, what is your name, child?" This would send me into a fit of giggles every time. You probably have done this yourself, or your grandmother has. She eventually went to live in a private home where other old ladies lived and were cared for. Not licensed home as exists today, but a loving home nevertheless. I often visited her there in my late teens and got to be friendly with the other ladies. I know this experience impressed me, as I love and have worked with this population. To my mother's credit, she had her own rules for living that did not include the strict code of conduct of her mother. Hey, we played cards even on Sunday, had beer in the fridge, and generally led a well-balanced life. We just didn't tell Grammy everything, but she knew. She made comments about Bob's playing poker with the guys, the devil's playground, and called out the window when we got in late, assuming we were up to no good. Good old Mom, she obviously got out from under her mother's gaze when she moved to Brooklyn at a tender age of 17. Even so, she frequently went back to the farm to care for her mother when she was ill with uncontrollable blood pressure and obesity. During the early years, Mom took the train many times between New York and Maine to visit and take care of family business. Many years my grandmother kept diaries, and I am privileged to own one of them, given to me recently by my oldest cousin, who said I was the best person to have it. I don't know how it survived all these years, given that it was written in 1956. But I am happy to have this treasure of family activities, mundane as they were. When I read it, I can visualize what she is doing and about whom she is writing. Her handwriting is sometimes poor and shaky, but with patience, I can read it pretty well. When I was in New Mexico for the reunion, my cousin Frank brought out a journal written by my grandfather in 1939 and 1940. How fascinating it is to see how differently my grandparents wrote about daily and weekly activities, revealing their own personalities and interests as nothing else can. My grandfather, in addition to his taciturn nature, was above all else a businessman. I say this in part because of what he wrote in his diary. There were meetings of various kinds having to do with his farming business, driving others to appointments, and notations on what he paid for services and other accounting notes, plus some brief notes about family members. I noted with interest his mention of my birth, very straightforward. Biggest snowstorm of the winter. George here in afternoon. Doris's baby Joyce born. That's it. You know? You can be sure that Ida Young had more to say about a new grandchild than that. Her interests included family activities, the weather, voting, and community affairs, phone calls from family, getting mail that day, letters she meant to write, and comments about us kids, comings and goings. The following comments are taken from the diary at random. I include some of her diary postings and reflect not only her interests but also where people were living and how they interacted. It reveals a very active household involving core members as well as her family who lived away in other places, my uncles, aunts, and cousins, friends she kept in touch with, and people who came to the house for various reasons. Maybe they picked her up to take her to church or shopping, or Uncle Larry would stop in to fix something or talk to Bob about a job. On the surface, this seems like pretty boring stuff, but it tells you what a family is all about and represents the role this house played in so many lives over the 15 years that we lived there. My grandmother's family and their well-being meant everything to her. During this time, she was living alone upstairs in the big house. Grandpa had passed away 5 years earlier in 1951, and I'm sure she missed him terribly. They had been married for 47 years. The details of her family, therefore, were very important to her and occupied most of her time. She was a busybody, some have said, and rightly so. Being totally self-absorbed teenagers, we thought she was pretty much of a snoop and should mind her own business. But I am thankful that these details were important to her because I am now the keeper of the story of our family life in the 50s, at least from her point of view. Grammy loved writing letters nearly as much as she loved talking, and we could hear her pounding away on her typewriter for hours at a time. Grandpa built a small desk into a corner of their living room next to a window where she had a good view of her world, and this is where she did her writing. Let's see, where did I leave off? Okay. About 2 years ago, I was laid off from my job, and my career as I had known it came to an end. When I think of how my life has changed since that time, since I began writing, I'm quite amazed. Amazed that I could actually produce a book, and amazed that at my age I could turn my career into that of an author, running my own business and speaking to groups about the experience. I turned 70 the year I published this book. I posted on Facebook at that time that it just might be my best year ever. And I was right. Inspiration, where does it come from? How many of you consider yourself to be creative? I'm sure you all are in many ways. Do you know where your inspiration comes from? I'd like to show you ways that I've been inspired. Before I sat down to write my book, words popped into my consciousness at any time of the day, like nagging thoughts that just wouldn't go away. Maybe you've had that experience. The point here is that I knew I was meant to write this book, and I knew the book's title long before I wrote a word. This is a story that is meant to be told. I don't mean that my story is better than any other, but there are events in my life that I believe can teach, enlighten, and inspire. And numerous people who have read my book bear this out in their comments to me. The world continues to change faster than ever before. All the more reason to remember and record your histories, lest they are forgotten. It was not easy to sit for hours at a time alone, weaving this tale into something that others could relate to. Many days were spent in tears, remembering, regretting, and forgiving. But through it all, I felt the presence of something greater than myself, urging me on and reassuring me that this would all be fine in the end. One can be inspired by anything at all. A memory, a garden, a person in your life, or a thought that comes to you seemingly from nowhere. Pay attention to those. They just may inspire you to create something wonderful. A poem, a story, a painting. I have tried to show that research into your subject matter can also inspire you in many ways, many surprising ways. I would like to close by reading a poem that I wrote after I had finished my book and it was being published. It expresses how I feel about dreaming a dream and making it come true. First, you dream. Something inside you needs to let go, needs to communicate something only you know. Then there's the idea of how to proceed, getting down to business to make it succeed. Interruptions and distractions are part of the deal, but don't let them dissuade you because you know what is real. Memories and knowledge and lots of research give life to your story, not leave you in the lurch. Persistence is key to this endeavor, and whatever you write, you'll be more than just clever, for you have talent and skill and bring truth to the page, and all will applaud you for their hearts to engage. Write, write, write all the day long. Some days you'll be weary, but not for long, for truth and redemption and loved ones win out in the long days and nights. It's what you're about. At the end of the story, you'll look up and say, "Thank you, I've finished. You are my bouquet, like roses and tulips in splendid array. The form and the substance are more than I knew I could imagine and write, and I grew into someone of whom I am proud, so that no one can say I'm just one of the crowd. I am a writer, an author, a friend, and a lover, authentic and bold, and you will discover I am more myself than even I knew, and the dream of months ago has indeed come true." Thank you all very much. I just want to say that if any of you want my email address, I'd be glad to give it to you. It's joyceadrian98@gmail.com. So if anybody you know would like a book, they can get in touch with me, and I'd be glad to mail them one. Okay? So I'd be glad to take any questions if anyone has any. And if not, that's okay too.
Joyce, can you repeat that email?
Yes, joyceadrian98@gmail.com. Yes.
What looks the most different to you coming? How long has it been since you've been in West Cumberland? And what changes do you see?
It's been about 50 years. So almost everything has changed. I left here in 1960 after I finished Westbrook Junior College. I lived at home while I attended college. And then after that, my parents sold the house and moved to Portland. So I haven't been back here since 1960. And I came up through here, I thought I guess I missed that part, but I came up through here a couple of times. And one was when I brought my mother up to see Ella White, who was living with Dick at the time. And as some of you know, they were like this. Lived across the street from us, and they were very, very dear friends. And neither one of them could go to see each other. So I'm very glad that I took the time that day because it was the last time they had a chance to see each other. And then another time I came up through, as I was finishing the book, I wanted to come back and see what it was like to go back home. They say you cannot go back. No, you really can't, because everything has changed. And but it's still fun to do that. I mean, after 50 years, the memories are just amazing as they flood back into your mind. And there are many things that are the same, but most things have changed. You know, coming up Gray Road just north of where my house is. That was all pine woods on both sides. You probably remember that. And now, you know, it's unrecognizable to me. In fact, when I came up through here, I went right by the road. and I didn't know where I was. So then I thought, oh, that was the road. So so I had to turn around and come back and drove in, and I found the church without any problem, but I didn't recognize it at all.
Do you remember the dance hall?
You mean
The picture over there, it was over there on the
Gray Road.
Gray Road.
next to my house? We call it Community Hall?
No.
Gray Road Inn.
Oh,
Gray Road Inn.
Sat at the Four Corners.
I don't think I remember
You
that.
remember it.
Remember that?
No.
Yeah, I remember that.
I
Because
don't
when I
think
was a teenager, the building was still there, but it wasn't being used.
Oh, okay, I don't remember that. The community hall, it has been moved now, I don't know where it is, you
It's on
probably
this
do.
road.
Oh, okay, well, this is was a wonderful place to go, because Doris Leland played piano, and we went to dances, and I learned how to do the polka, you know, the beer barrel polka.
Sure did.
And all kinds of other music that Doris played. I guess she still does, which is a miracle to me.
There was spinnies.
Oh.
Corners.
And I had my piano recitals there. So I took piano lessons for 4 or 5 years. And Mrs. Lawson, who is from Falmouth, came up to my house, and I think it cost $1.25 to have a piano lesson in those days. I wonder what it costs today. So piano recitals were held there, and we had, Netta and I organized a few parties. As teenagers, we got permission to use the hall, and we got some music and some food and some boys and girls.
And some boys, yeah, she said that first. Get some boys.
And so anyway, it was a great place to have fun. I mean, it seems like just those days are just gone forever. People don't do those things anymore. It's so structured, and people are afraid to let their kids go out alone because of all the things that happen. But it wasn't like that then, as you know. And it's
All the
fun
ball
to...
games in the field?
Yes, the ball games in the
All the
field.
ball games in your field.
That's right. That's right. So, I don't know, did I answer your question? I get talking.
Did you ever do anything with Mel or Mabel's chicken farm?
Well, I didn't personally. I don't think I did, but my mother and I would walk down there to buy eggs. And I used to watch Mabel candle the eggs. And I bet kids don't know what that means today. But I learned that there were like, 5 different sizes of eggs, and this is how she, marketed her eggs, and it was really interesting to me.
I remember the Halloween parties in your barn. We had good Halloween parties.
That's right, we did. Howard told me that. Howard Kennedy emailed me and said he remembered those Halloween parties too. And I kind of forgot them until he mentioned them to me. But they were fun, and my parents were good. The thing was, it was grown-ups and kids all together having a good time. It wasn't just kids, so that was fun.
Later on, if you have a few minutes, we have a photo album of pictures of single-shot negatives that were left at Mabel's house. I now own my grandmother's house.
Oh.
And when Mike inherited it from Mabel, those negatives were there, and I told him about it. And he said, I told you, anything left in the house is yours. So I was able to develop them, but they're about 50 years old, and you might enjoy seeing
I
some
will,
of the pictures.
thank you, I will enjoy looking at that. I was reminiscing with Irene just before about her mother, of course, was our Girl Scout leader for quite a few years. She was just a wonderful person. And we would go in to her house after school on Girl Scout Day, and she always had warm chocolate chip cookies just waiting for us there, and we'd eat those cookies. And then one time when I was a little older, maybe 17, she said that they weren't going to be home for a while, but there were lots of raspberries in their big raspberry patch. And if I wanted any, I could come. Well, she didn't have to say that twice. I came up there and I picked all the raspberries I could get into a basket, and I went home and made raspberry jam. The first time I'd ever made it all by myself. And so I still remember that. Anything else? If not, I just want to thank all of you again for letting me come here to talk about my book. I hope you enjoy it. There is still more here if you would like to buy one, or buy some for Christmas gifts or whatever. And thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
And Kenny, and everyone else, and enjoy the refreshments, and if you have any other questions, you know, come up with me. Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
So you enjoy your
Put them in my scrapbook. Put me back to work. Oh, yeah. You familiar?
I get thrown off of that.
I know. Say hello for me. And this is for you.